Oh hi, Tim Leeson here. I had a comment on a previous episode of the podcast from someone who I don't know, who pointed out that I went through the whole episode of the podcast without saying my name. So I'll try not to do that. My name's Tim Leeson. I just walked out of my house to come to this little park where I often record this business, and walked past a little lad, who must have been maybe, 10 years old, with a Father Christmas cuddly toy. It's probably about 3/4 the size of himself, that he was angrily flinging against the wall repeatedly. So I don't know. Is that okay? Should I have intervened? I hope he's okay. If you listen carefully, you might hear the distant sound of the funfair. Colchester seems to get the same funfair reappear just around the corner from my house every half hour. In previous places that I've lived, funfairs arrive, stay for a couple of weeks, maybe once a year. But these guys seem to be here more often than they're not. And I hate them. I actually do hate them. It's just really noisy and obnoxious. And I'm trying to sleep. I'm old. Anyway, so here we are. I am recording this intro before I record the actual conversation with this month's guest, Myrthe Peters, because time was tight. I no longer have the freedom and flexibility of working from home, which means I need to do these really on weekends. And this weekend, just a few short days before this goes live, was the only time that Myrthe and I could meet. That worked for both of us. Didn't leave us much time, so I'm recording this before I record the conversation. So normally I would say something like, Myrthe was great to chat to. I loved having her on the show. What an interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I'm sure all of that will be true, but I can't vouch for it yet because I haven't done it yet. So instead of saying how great the conversation was, I will tell you that I'm confident the conversation will be a good one. Myrthe is somebody who I haven't met. In fact, Myrthe lives on the other side of the world in Australia. But a mutual friend, Cassie, introduced us. I met up with Cassie a few weeks ago at the time of recording in London. She's been living in Portugal for a while, and we had a coffee together. And she mentioned that she had a friend who she thought might be an interesting guest for the podcast. And I get anxious when people say that, because sometimes that's followed by a description of somebody who would not be interesting for the podcast. And then I have to kind of awkwardly decide how I rebuff the offer. But in this case, Cassie described Myrthe and what she does, and I should have known better than to doubt my friend, because what Myrthe does is super interesting, super relevant to the themes of God or Whatever, and super relevant to my life, which recently, since the last episode that I recorded, has become the life of a full-time hospital chaplain. Myrthe is a doula, and traditionally when people think about doulas, they think about childbirth, people who kind of guide you through the process of childbirth and are there throughout it. I guess maybe similar to a midwife. I'm not quite sure what the difference is between a doula and a midwife, but I guess maybe that'll come up in the conversation. But what is really interesting about Myrthe is that, yes, she is your traditional doula, but she's also an end of life doula. So she does what doulas do for people during childbirth for people who are facing death. So essentially she guides people through the process of dying, which I've been having to think about a lot recently, because being a hospital chaplain means that I spend quite a lot of time with people who are dying and their families. I earlier this week, at the time of recording, was in a hospital room with a guy who had died. And that was my first experience of that. Never seen a dead body before. And actually it wasn't, I was nervous about it. So I went up onto the ward and asked to see this patient, and the nurse on the ward told me that the patient had died, but that his family were in with him and that I could pop in and see them. And what I wanted to say was, no, I'm too scared to do that. I'll ask one of the other chaplains to do it. But obviously that wouldn't have been tremendously professional. So I said, that's fine, and smiled and went through and spoke to the family for a little while. And I was nervous, but actually it wasn't traumatic at all. It was very peaceful. The family were very lovely, obviously very sad. But it wasn't a horrible, disturbing, unsettling thing. But anyway, the point is, in my job, I have to think a lot about death, more than I am used to. And even though so far, a few weeks in, my experiences of dying people and people who have died have all been quite peaceful, it's still something which I think is going to take me a while to get used to. Because I think in our society here in the West, we hide death. We seal it behind closed doors and pretend that it doesn't happen. And particularly those of us who are, hopefully all being well, still a long way away from having to face our own mortality. I think society, we've become very scared of death, haven't we? Even though it's something that we all face. And like I say, there was a time when people would die in their homes with friends and family around them. But increasingly, people are kind of ferried off into hospitals behind closed doors to die. And what's really sad, something that I do find slightly disturbing about working for the hospital, is that lots of people end up dying alone. Which is, I can't imagine anything sadder, really, than having to die alone. So, in theory, this is where chaplaincy come in. And the hospital also have a brilliant team of volunteers who spend time with people who are dying. But it's also where people like Myrthe come in, who can talk to dying people, but also their families and their relatives, and help people to prepare for that process and to make it a little bit less scary. Because it shouldn't be scary, necessarily. It's something that every single one of us, without fail, will experience. And actually, one of the things which I am beginning to learn at the hospital is that generally it's not as scary or as traumatic as movies might make you think, and that most people, when they die quite peacefully. Anyway, that's that. I am gonna stop talking. I'm gonna now jump forward into the future to tomorrow, which, when you listen to this, if you listen to it on the day that it came out, is last Sunday. Don't worry about it, I've confused myself. What I'm trying to say is, I'm gonna hand over to my conversation with Myrthe. I hope you enjoy it. I hope I enjoy it. I hope Myrthe enjoys it. And I will see you guys on the other side. Peace out.
Two big walks with the dog, 2 times exercise.
Wow, very impressive.
I know, it wasn't planned, but it just happened. And did lots of packing. So
oh yeah, of course, because you are currently in Australia and soon to be moving to Portugal, is that right?
That's correct.
That's exciting. Your house it doesn't look like the house of somebody who's in the middle of an international move. It looks really nice and tidy and well presented.
Yeah.
Is
I
that just
think
the
the
angle?
real no, actually, there is things that I'm not going to pack until the final week because I don't want the place to feel really bare for these
Okay.
last 2 weeks. So, you know, all the pretty things are still out, but
Yeah.
all the unnecessary stuff is packed. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Cool. That's a
yeah,
good call. Well, I'm glad the pretty stuff is still out. It makes this a lovely
yes,
conversation to have. You've got lovely potted plants and light and stuff behind you, whereas I've just got like a
exactly.
slightly abstract cream colored void. Um, I'm in the process of trying to buy a house at the moment, which is
Yeah,
proving to be little bit of a nightmare. And so I very over enthusiastically packed up my bookshelf that used to sit here behind me. So I used to have a lovely display here of books and other little decorative things. But yeah, now it's just a bit of an abstract background. So I'm glad that yours is nicer than mine. So people who are watching
I'm
this can
making
look at
up for
your side of
this.
the screen. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, they can listen to my side of the screen, but all the views will be on your side of the screen.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, tell me a bit. So, you've been in Australia now for how long? Remind me.
5.5 years. May
Okay.
2016, I
Okay.
moved here, and prior to that move, I was living in the UK, but I'm
Okay.
originally from the Netherlands. I'm Dutch.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
So you've moved around a lot. So you grew up in the Netherlands,
I
is that right?
did. Yeah.
And then moved to the UK as an adult.
Yes, I just graduated from university. I was very unexperienced, and my English was, I spoke English, but it's different when you move to a place.
Yeah.
Um, and you suddenly have to use all kinds of words that are pretty much non-existent in your vocabulary. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
it was really interesting, but also amazing because that's how you learn, right? It's kind of like
Hmm.
this deep dive. That's what it felt like to me. It's this deep dive of
Absolutely.
language, culture, big change, moving from Holland to um, England.
Yeah.
And you would think it's maybe not that big of a change because back then it was a European.
Well,
Well,
that's
it's
right.
still European,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Yeah.
yeah. But
No, I can relate to
it was a
that.
little bit.
I moved around a lot growing up as well. I was born in Belgium and then moved to France, America,
Yeah.
back to France. And exactly what you've just described, especially with the moves to France, the move from America to France, I found that living in America, I'd lost all of my French, just
Hmm.
completely gone. I wouldn't have said that I spoke French at all. And then moving back to France, it was all there in my subconscious. It just needed a kind of couple of months to kind of just immerse yourself in the language for it to
Yeah.
kind of start coming back. And I find the same thing happens now, that if I try to speak French now, like off the cuff, it's super rusty and it takes me a long time to remember certain words and that kind of stuff. But if I go to visit French speaking family or friends and I'm there for a few days, it takes just a few days before it all kind of starts coming back. And it's definitely the best way to learn a language is to immerse yourself in it, no
Yeah.
doubt.
And isn't it beautiful to know that you spoke that language once and now you think, I'm not too sure about it anymore. But as soon as you start practicing, it just all comes back again. I think
Yeah,
that's so
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It makes me wonder what else is locked up in my brain that I don't realize is there.
Exactly.
Like, Um, yeah, what was the name of that terrible movie? Limitless, was it? Something like that, where they invent like a pill that allows you to use your whole brain rather
Oh,
than just
what's his name
10% of
again?
the
With Bradley
time.
Cooper?
Is that, yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that rings a
Yeah,
bell.
it's a
Yeah, it wasn't a
terrible
very good
film indeed.
movie.
But yeah,
Yeah,
bad
but a cool
idea.
concept. Yeah, yeah. Actually, I'm not sure I would be up for it. I was going to say it would be fun, but my worry is that the 90% of my brain that I'm not using is like in a permanent state of being terrified, or like it's all stuff that I'm like trying not to think about.
Yeah, of course, of course.
I
Could
don't
be a
want to
bit dangerous.
unrepress that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So you said you moved to the UK just after having studied, is that right?
yeah.
So
I
you went to uni in
graduated
Holland.
from, yeah. graduated from uni in 2011, my master's. Then I went traveling for 5 months, and after that, I just moved. Yeah.
Okay. And what did you
Yeah.
study?
I studied pedagogical sciences, so everything that has to do with bringing up children.
Okay.
And then my master's was socialization, education, and youth policy with a
Oh,
focus
wow.
on prevention. Yeah.
Okay.
It was awesome. It was everything from how do you deal with kids who just hang about on the street with no
Hmm.
purpose to policy writing for government. Um, how do you engage with young people? Um, how do you make sure that they have a purpose, that they feel at home in the
Hmm.
community? And then obviously a big part of it was troubled teenagers. Um,
Yeah.
but there was um, a lot of knowledge was drawn from positive psychology. So they did
Okay.
try to give a positive spin on it, but
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's really interesting because your studies are all about young people and children, but actually the stuff that we're going to be talking about today on this podcast is, I guess, usually kind of associated with the other end of life, with kind of old age and kind of towards the end of life. So um well, I was going to say, how did you get from one thing to the other? But maybe we should say what the other is. So, do you want to
Mm,
talk a little bit about what it is that you do
yeah,
now?
I'd love to. so I am now an end of life doula. And for those people who have never heard of a doula, it's a professional person who supports people in practical, emotional, and spiritual ways when they die. And um, it's beautiful that more and more people are finding out about it because
Mm,
there's so much to the end of life that we do not realize. And that is likely because people are scared of it. There's a huge
yeah.
taboo on the topic of death and dying. And as doulas, we try to break the taboos. We try to, well, our aim is to educate people on their options.
Hmm.
And yes, we work with people at the end of their lives. So when they've, for example, had a terminal diagnosis, but we also can work with people who are just planning the end of their lives. So they haven't had a
Okay.
diagnosis of any kind, but they would like some support with the planning of it. So that's
Yeah.
an option too. Or you work with the family who are caring for someone who's dying. Um,
Hmm.
so each case is very unique.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what made you? How did you go from studying, children's education and youth policy and that kind of stuff to now a career which, like I say, is kind of at the end of people's lives
Mm.
and guiding them through that?
Um, I've always been very, very fascinated by death and dying and um, let's say spiritual stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but I suppose I grew up in an environment where people don't talk about it and, it's considered strange to
Yeah.
want to talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
It's like people wanted to protect me from it, whereas I had a real hunger for knowledge and experience in that space.
Hmm.
Um, and because I at one point thought, okay, well maybe it is strange. I better not do anything with this. I'm just gonna, tuck it away.
Yeah.
Um, but the interest, the fascination never left. And there was one point This was probably, let me think, it was early 2019. I had an astrology reading and I shared how specific behaviors kept coming back and specific interests. And I didn't know much about astrology back in the day. And I still know
Right.
very little, but I know the basics. And it was in that moment that when I shared about death and dying space and my interest in that, it was almost as if that person who I was doing the reading with gave me a permission slip
Hmm.
and said, "This is totally you. Like it's written in the charts. Can you try to embrace this?
Interesting.
What would it look like for you if you explore this?" And
Hmm.
from that day, I was like, "Oh, okay. So maybe there is something here. Maybe I'm not weird after all."
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so then I started reading more, um, doing research about like the type of work I could do, and
Hmm.
then suddenly I stumbled upon doulas, and just felt so drawn to it. It
Right.
still took me 2 years to sign up for the course because I thought, oh, maybe I need to understand the beginning of life first. I'm first going to do the birth doula course,
Oh, okay.
which,
So you've done that as well.
yeah, yeah. So I'm also a
Okay.
birth doula.
Okay.
But I really want to focus on the end of life space. But the universe had, because I first booked this birth uh, doula course, and then the pandemic happened, and that was cancelled.
Hmm.
And then I think the universe told me, okay, well, here's the end of life doula course for you. You can do it right now. So it's like, oh,
Okay.
okay, this is a sign for me, and I'm going
Right.
all in. So that's what I did. And when I attended the course, it honestly felt like I was coming home. I could have conversations with people
Mm.
about everything and anything death related. Um,
Yeah.
and immediately, like, really deep, really profound, just absolutely beautiful. And it was such comfort to know that there are so many beautiful people, supporting other
Mm.
people at the end of their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're the timeline on what you've just described is all quite recent, eh? You're talking about
Yeah.
really in the past kind of couple of years or
Yeah.
so that you've kind of explored this and been on the course and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So where are you with that process now? Have you finished the actual studying part of it, or are you still doing the course? Where are you with it?
I have finished the course, and
Okay.
I'm I'm okay to practice. I
Okay.
have my certificate. Obviously, there is always stuff that we need to keep doing to stay educated.
Of
And
course.
also for me, when I am going to move to Portugal, that means different legislation. So I will have to familiarize myself with what the law states in Portugal. For example, are you allowed to have a body in the home in
Right.
Portugal
Right.
once a person has died? And if yes, how long for? Because here in Australia, the
Hmm.
different states, the state that I live in, it's allowed up to 4 days max. And then the next state, which is only an hour and a half away, it's 6 days. So,
Oh wow. So that's 4 days that they're allowed to have the body in their
yeah,
house.
yeah.
That
Obviously,
seems like
obviously, it needs to
sorry, go on,
be
go on.
it needs to be catered for. You can't just have a
Yeah.
dead body in the house. But
Right.
yes, there is all
Okay.
kinds of rules and regulations about it, and the role of a doula is to know these different options, let the
Okay.
family know, so that then they can
Yeah.
make a decision about what works best for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of your role will be knowing what the legislation and that kind of stuff is in Portugal, so
Yeah,
you can kind of guide the families.
yeah.
And you've talked a little bit about kind of preparing people for death and working with families and that kind of stuff. Now, you'll have to educate me here because I don't know much about doulas in terms of end of life or in terms of birth. But when I think of a birth doula, I think of something that's almost quite close to a midwife, of somebody who's there during labor, helping the mother, seeing the process all the way through from beginning to end. Is that the
Hmm.
same with the end of life? Will you be with people while they actually die? Kind of, and what, I guess, what role do you play in that context when you're kind of sat with somebody kind of on their deathbed? What do you kind of
Yeah.
do in that situation?
So it's really the choice of whoever hires me. So if that's the person who's dying and they would want my service all the way through, then that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
But if that person says, hey, I really need some help with navigating difficult family conversations about how I want my end of life to
Mm,
look, we'll do that. But maybe once that's done, they don't require my service anymore. So, as I mentioned before, it's so unique.
mm,
We really have to adapt to every situation and the different people who play an important role in that, and particularly working with the person who is
yeah.
dying, or who's hired us, because it's not always the person who's dying who hires
Oh,
doulas.
right. Okay.
Quite often it's a family
Okay.
member, and often it's in a stressful situation. Someone has received a terminal
Mm,
diagnosis, and suddenly there's all these things that need to be arranged, and people don't know where to start
yeah. Yeah.
because there is so much information,
Yeah.
and it's really up to us to go, okay, well, let's all take a breath.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and let's look at all the different options. Let's see what's already been planned by the person who is
Yeah.
sick and is going to
Yeah.
die.
It's
Yeah.
really interesting. As you know, because we've spoken before, I recently started a job as a hospital chaplain, just kind of a couple of weeks ago, and in the past couple of weeks, have had more dealings with death than ever in my life before. um, I I have now seen my first dead body, and that's going to be something which I'm going to kind of have to get used to in work, and will
Hmm.
happen a lot. And there will be, it hasn't happened yet, but there definitely will be times when I'll be with the person while they die, offering some kind of religious or spiritual comfort, whatever it is that they need.
Yeah.
And yeah, all of that is quite intense and quite scary. And I guess one of the reasons why it's so intense and scary is, and you've kind of already alluded to this, that death is something which we kind of don't talk about, don't acknowledge. And in fact, talking about it is almost seen as a little bit like, what's wrong with you? Why do you want to talk about that? That's sad and dark. Um, and I would say increasingly in the West, it's something that's kind of done behind closed doors in institutions rather than at home. That it wasn't too long ago that people would die at home with their family around them and that kind of thing. Whereas it feels like now people die in hospitals. And when I go to visit patients who are dying, they tend to be in a side room in a hospital that they've got to themselves, which is probably good rather than being on a ward surrounded by the
Mhm.
noise and chaos of kind of other people. Um, but it also means that they're kind of by themselves, that they're alone. And um, I think probably quite a lot of people in our society do end up dying alone, in a strange place. And I think what you're doing in terms of helping people to think about how they want to die is so important, because I don't want to die alone. That's horrible. So, yeah, I think what am I trying to say? I guess what I'm trying to say is beginning to think about it, talk about it, prepare for it, be aware that it's going to happen to you at some point because it happens to everybody, probably helps that whole process. But for whatever reason in our kind of society, we like I say, it's all kind of no, let the doctors deal with that.
Tucked away.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I mean, in terms of like, even just when you tell people what you do you find that people kind of, how do people react to what you do is what I'm trying to say.
Get very varied
Yeah.
reactions. Some people go, "Oh my god, this, like, what is this?" Like, really interested, never heard of it, but really want to know more.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's people, and you pick up on this immediately, who it's almost as if they go into this, "Ooh,"
Yeah.
the word death has come up,
Yeah.
end of life, this is scary, I don't want to go
Yeah.
there. And then, I have an easy way to kind of turn the conversation around and not have the emphasis on what I do, but make it about the other person.
Yeah.
Because there is no point in sharing what I do with people who rather not know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, I want everyone to know,
Yeah.
but people want to know when they're ready, and some people need a bit more time,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that's all okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like all of those reactions are quite understandable, aren't they? And I think in terms of myself, that what you just described as a kind of woo kind of reaction is probably my reaction. That's my instinct. And so my first encounter with death in the hospital was it earlier this week or end of last week? I can't quite remember. But I had a patient on my list of people who wanted to see a chaplain. So I went up to the ward to go and visit this patient and asked the nurse at the nurse station if I could pop in and see so and so. And she went, "Oh, he's actually just died. He just died a little while ago." And I went, "Oh, okay, well that's fine. Obviously we'll take him off the list in that case." And she said, "Oh, but his family's in with him now, and they might appreciate you popping in." And like I say, my internal reaction was, "I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'll get someone else to do it." But I couldn't obviously say, "No, thanks. I'm too scared." So I had to go, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that," and maintain a kind of peaceful composure. So I kind of
Yeah.
you have to put on your PPE before you see any patient, so gloves and an
Yeah.
apron and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I used that little moment to kind of, okay, ready myself. I had my little book of kind of readings and that kind of stuff ready. So I found a few in case they wanted me to do something, either religious or non-religious, but something a bit ceremonial, I guess. So I kind of took my time kind of getting ready for it and that kind of stuff. And then, yeah, popped my head kind of through the curtain and the family were all there. And actually, the reality is that it was very peaceful, and I didn't need to be scared of it at all, because it was very sad. Obviously, the family were very teary and upset, having just lost a loved one. But it was a peaceful place, and the guy died with his family around him, which obviously is awesome. And it felt good. I left after, well, no, it did feel good. That is the right thing to say, but not good in a kind of like,
Yeah.
not happy, but good in a kind of sense of, yeah, it was meaningful, and he died in the best possible way, and that's the best thing that we can kind of hope for. But like I say, my initial response to being thrown in at the deep end was exactly what you've just described, as I kind of, oh no, that seems a little bit heavy. But obviously you got to push through that when you're a hospital chaplain, and hopefully that'll
I
become
was
less
gonna
so.
say, you've chosen a really interesting profession, in that sense, because like it's inevitable
Yeah.
for you to see this on a regular basis, I would say.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do you
And
think? How do you feel about that?
well, I was really aware of that in the weeks leading up to me starting the new job. So I had the job interview and got offered the job, and it was all very exciting and positive and whatever, and I didn't really think about it. And then there was, I guess, a couple of months between me being offered the job and me actually starting it. And in those couple of months, those kind of thoughts start to begin to kind of pop into my head of like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to like be with dead people. That's quite scary.
Mhm.
But I had just finished reading this thing by have you heard of Mark Manson? Have you come across him? He wrote a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I follow him on Instagram, and I really like a lot of his stuff. And he had written this thing about I can't remember quite what the language he used was, but something along the lines of how do you find meaning, how do you find purpose in your life, and that kind of thing. And his line on it, which I really really liked, was that too many people, when they reflect on that question, think about it in terms of what do I find fun, what do I like doing. Okay, now how can I spend my life doing that? And he says it's much more meaningful to ask yourself. I'm completely paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact language that he used, but essentially he said it's much more meaningful to ask yourself what are the challenges that you want to rise to. Basically, what are the things that other people would find too scary to do, but you feel like you could possibly do that. Um, what's the his whole kind of thing is that he swears a lot. That's kind of part of his kind of shtick, I think. So he talks about what's the shit that you're willing to deal with that nobody else is willing to deal with. Um, and so with the hospital chaplaincy job, there's two sides of it. There's a side of it which I'm really actually quite confident in, which is making time for people who are, in a difficult place, who are scared, and being reassuring and sitting with people and making time for them. That's what I spent my whole career doing as a youth worker and as a
Hmm.
youth and community chaplain later on, and that kind of stuff. That's kind of what I do. And it's not to say that it's easy, but I know I can do it. But then there's the stuff which is new to me, which is all the stuff around death and dying, which is scary, and I'm not confident in it, but it's stuff that I want to be good at. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's there are challenges that come up in life which ultimately I actually don't really give a shit about, and I kind of feel like if I didn't do this, what difference would it make to anybody's life? Do you know what I mean? But then there are
Yeah.
challenges which I think rising to this would be a really good thing to do. And that's kind of part of my thinking with this job, that learning to not be so scared of death would be a really good thing to do for myself as well as for anybody else. Um, so it does mean like I'm really pushing myself with this job, like it's a real new challenge, and it's a new kind of challenge for me. But it feels like, okay, well, if I'm gonna climb a mountain, this is the one that I want to climb. This feels like a really good thing to do. So um, I think it's going to continue being quite scary and overwhelming for some time, but certainly the hope is that it will become less scary, less overwhelming. And the benefits of that are not just to the patients who I'm spending time with and their families, but also to myself and to the people around me, to my family, to my friends, that gradually becoming less scared of death, I think will make me a more peaceful person, or less anxious person. Um, so it's almost like, what's that thing that they talk about in CBT? I'll get the phrase slightly wrong. I want to say confrontation therapy, but that's not what it is. Anyway, it's a kind of thing where, okay, say you're really scared of spiders. Let's go find some spiders. We're going to go and hang out with some
Yeah.
spiders today because that's how
Hmm.
you get over your fear. And there's an element of that with this job. Like I'm, I find death quite scary, not in a kind of, I think in the same way that most people find death quite scary. It's not like I kind of obsess about it or anything like that, but it's quite a scary thing. But I feel like, okay, well, let's go and spend some time with death then, and learn to be less scared of it. That's kind of my thinking. That was a really waffly answer to your question, but can you see where I'm coming from?
Well, I can definitely see where you're coming from. And I love it that you see how it's not just benefiting you, exposing yourself to it,
Hmm.
but it will have an effect on the people who you support in the hospital,
Yeah,
as well as the people in your direct environment.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is by a Russian saint and mystic called Saint Cosmas, and he said, "Discover the spirit of peace for yourself, and 1,000 around you shall be saved." Discover the spirit
Mm,
of peace for yourself, and 1,000 around you shall be saved. And I think,
it's
particularly in
beautiful.
Christianity, and probably in a lot of organized religion, we have this whole thing of, oh, it's my duty to save people, to be, whether you're talking about like in a kind of spiritual go to heaven when they die kind of a way, or just in terms of helping people by feeding the poor or whatever. We have this real kind of like, I have to work hard, I have to be really anxiously work super hard to save everybody around me because that's my Christian duty. But I really like that St. Cosmas quote, because it's saying, actually, the way that you save people, the way that you will save the most people around you, is by discovering the spirit of peace for yourself. So that might mean confronting your fears. And it might also mean developing a practice of meditation and mindfulness. It might mean slowing down. It might mean developing good self care habits and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
which, like I say, I think traditionally in religious conversations, we've seen that kind of stuff as a little bit kind of like navel gazing, what good is it really doing? But actually, it's the best thing
Mhm.
that you can do, because that's how you help people, by being a peaceful presence, and a presence that's alive and connected and that kind of thing, rather than kind of wringing your hands anxiously, trying to do more, trying to work harder. um that's not really it for me.
Yeah, I really resonate with that, and that comes back in the doula work as well,
Hmm.
because so often people just want to be around someone who is not afraid for the feelings that come with death.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's offering them a space to show all the emotions.
Hmm.
And everyone has different emotions, right? We all react differently to a situation like that.
Yeah, yeah,
um, and
yeah,
it's so important that everyone can just do that without feeling weird about it, like
yeah.
experience it full.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And just having somebody to validate, that
Yeah,
what you're feeling is fine and normal and it's okay, and I'm not scared of it, and I'm not judging you because of it. That's really powerful.
yeah,
I wondered
yeah,
just now when I was talking about religion, it made me wonder, I guess in your job, similarly to mine, you're not there to impose any kind of worldview, any kind of ideas about what happens when you die, that kind of thing, but to support the person in whatever it is that they believe, whether they're religious or not religious.
yeah.
But um, outside of your kind of professional interaction with the people who you're working with, are you coming from a place of like, do you have a kind of sense, well, what do you believe about death is what I'm trying to say? Are you coming from a place of religious or spiritual kind of understanding of it, or where do you stand on that stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that death is not just a physical thing that happens at the end of our lives. I believe that death happens all around us, all the time, within ourselves as well.
Okay, okay.
Um, so death could look like um, losing a friendship. Death could look like losing a
Hmm.
pet. Death
Hmm.
could look like changing of seasons,
Hmm.
a new cycle of the moon. And for me, once I start to look at death in nature and
Hmm.
more also in like a cyclical way, it started to become much more part of my life.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for me, I don't necessarily come from a religious um, background in that sense,
Hmm.
but I do believe um, that there is such a thing as reincarnation, past
Okay,
lives, and I'm gonna
okay.
come back into something else,
Okay.
into someone else, and I like that belief. For
Yeah.
some reason, that gives me a sense of peace.
Hmm.
And I also know that some of the stuff that I'm working through, um, that, stuff that's hard and challenging and difficult, that maybe not all of that is mine. Maybe that's coming from past generation, it's ancestral trauma, maybe it's from a past
Interesting.
life. But I'm working through it now because I do not want to pass it on. I do not want this to go to a next soul.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. That's
Mm.
I mean, I would, so, well, as you know, and as everybody who listens to this knows, I'm coming from a traditionally kind of Christian kind of point of view. Um, but I don't really kind of know what I believe about the afterlife and that kind of thing. I'm kind of a little bit, I feel like nobody really knows. We're all
Yeah.
kind of just guessing, and we kind of have some ideas and that kind of thing. But I do really like the concept of karma, which I think in a way is what you've just described. And I think karma is something that in the West we often misinterpret. We hear people talking about it on TV and in movies and that kind of stuff. And they interpret it as meaning like if you do a bad thing, then a bad thing will happen to you because that's just how the universe balances itself out, which is quite a crude, I think, misinterpretation of what I understand karma to be, which is um the best the best analogy that I've heard for it, which is also quite crude, is if you're in a public swimming pool and you piss in the pool, then you're making the pool worse for everybody else, including yourself.
Hmm.
So you end up swimming in a pissed in pool just like everybody else. And that's kind of what karma is, that your actions have consequences, including for yourself. So if you are unkind to people, then you're putting unkindness out into the world and making the world slightly less kind, which impacts the way you experience the world as well, because you've put out this kind of unkindness. So in that sense, it is kind of like if you do bad stuff will happen to you, but it's not kind of like some kind of divine retribution. It's just, well, you've put badness out there. Now there's badness in the air. And what you've just described in terms of dealing with stuff now, I kind of, I mean, I don't necessarily have a belief in reincarnation as such, but I'm completely on the same page as you in the sense that me dealing with my bad stuff now, my tricky stuff, or my anxieties, my traumas, whatever else it um, is a way of making the swimming pool a little bit nicer for everybody to swim in, including myself.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some kind of eternal dimension to that. Maybe that echoes through time after I die. Maybe there's a heaven where people go to, maybe there's a reincarnation, whatever, or maybe death is it and that's the end and there is no kind of sense of eternity. But whichever one of those things is true, by putting kindness into the world, by putting compassion into the world, or whatever, you're creating a better world for everybody to live in, including yourself. And I'd like to think that echoes through time in some way. So I'm with you on that, definitely.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm going to use that analogy about the pool.
Okay, cool. I don't even know where I got that from, but I think it's really good. I think somebody said it about COVID. I think it came up in COVID and about wearing. No, that was it. It was about somebody had described having non-smoking sections in restaurants
Hmm.
as basically being the equivalent of having a no pissing section in the pool. Because it's like, I mean, it's
It's
still
kind of
there, it's still
impossible.
in the
Yeah.
air. I can't remember where it came from, but I quite liked it kind of as an analogy.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So when you head over to Portugal, which is soon, right? We're talking about in a few weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Hmm.
So at that point, I guess a lot of your time will be spent, like, will you be setting up your business? Kind of, will you be self-employed as a doula, or is there a kind of a body that you'll belong to where people will kind of, you'll get referrals to, or how does that all work?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because um, looking at the end of life doula space and comparing it to the birth doulas, the end of life doulas are now where the birth doulas were 25 years ago. So it's all still quite new.
Yeah,
We are all
yeah,
self employed, and most of our clients come through word of mouth or a Google search. Um,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, in terms of business development in Portugal, I'm still looking at best ways.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe I'm going to try to find um, palliative care settings and see if they would like some help there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm obviously going to have to build a little bit of a, not a little bit, I'm going to have to build a new professional network there. But I
Yeah.
could go to, GPs, expat communities, and I could, the idea is I'm going to put myself out there.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm.
yeah, so that's interesting. And also in the meantime, whilst I'm doing that, um, I run circles, and they're called dialogues. Die,
Okay.
as in
Oh, right. Yeah.
DIE,
Yeah.
alogues.
Yeah. I'm with you.
And it's a circle where people come together to talk about death and dying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to do a little bit more face to face as well once I'm in
Cool.
Portugal. At the moment, they're online, and they're just small,
Right.
intimate groups, and it's really to break the taboo around it and to give people an opportunity to um, experience what it is to have a conversation about death and dying, and maybe,
Mm.
getting out of the comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I do that with the help of a game, actually. So it's quite fun. Um,
Okay. What's
and
the game? How does
the
that work?
yeah, the game is called the Death Deck, and it's basically a
Okay.
card set. There's two types of cards. There's multiple choice questions, and there's open questions. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, there's a theme. I talk a little bit about the theme, and then we play the game. So I literally shuffle the cards, and we pick random cards, and they have, as I said, multiple choice or open-ended questions about anything and everything that's got to do with death and dying. So, for example, what would you like to listen to when you can no longer speak, and you are dying? Is it sounds of nature? Is it motivational speech, or
Mm.
audiobooks, or is it your favorite music? And
Yeah.
it's really to get people thinking about what it is that they would like, who they would like, what do they like to smell, what do they like to touch, to feel like. So it's really bringing in the senses, and that's very
Mm-hmm.
important for my work. Like, I find it so important that um, we draw in the senses, because there's also a sense of sense of ritual in that, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
listen to specific music because we have a feeling
Mm-hmm.
with associated with that. It's the same with smell. It brings up memories. Touch. So, for example, is a bedding that you really don't like, then we shouldn't
Yeah.
have that anywhere near.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
do you like when someone massages your hand? Do you like it in general when it's firm, or do you like touch? So there's
Yeah.
all those kind of
Yeah.
things, that are going to be hugely important at the end of life, because it's a very special time, and we want to make it
Yeah.
as comfortable as possible. But if people don't know what type of stuff they can consider, then it's going to be really
Yeah.
hard putting it all together on the stress. And by playing the game, um, it's kind of like making it more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some
It's
really fun cards in there as well. So it's not, all super serious. Like, there is, like, we laugh a lot as well, which is pretty
yeah.
good.
It's really cool. I actually, as you're describing it, I remember that I have done that. I've been to two, I think they were called death cafes
Yeah.
rather than dialogues,
Yeah.
um, but exactly the same format. So we sat on tables and we had this little deck of cards, and you pick one at random, and it asks you a question. Sometimes quite pragmatic things about, who would you like to leave your possessions to
Yeah.
when you die, and sometimes quite kind of deeper, meaningful stuff about what you believe
Mhm.
happens after you die and that kind of thing. And I went along to one of those because a friend of mine who is still a hospice chaplain was organizing it. So I went kind of to support my friend, and again went kind of feeling like, oh, this is going to be heavy, isn't it? Like, we're just talking about death. It's called a death cafe. Like, it feels like it's going to be really morbid. But actually going along to it was I left feeling much less anxious than
Mm.
I felt when I had arrived, both in terms of, in the moment, just kind of general anxiety about meeting new people and that kind of stuff, but also in terms of feeling slightly more peaceful about death, maybe just 1% more peaceful about death, but just having had the kind of conversation and it not being kind of a taboo thing just helped me to be a little bit less scared of it. And those kinds of questions, which you've just described, like I say, 2 weeks into this new job, I'm more aware than ever of just how important they are.
Mhm.
Because, well, like I'll give you an example. In just a few days after having started my job, I had been given a list of patients to go and see, and went to go and see one particular patient, and I had no knowledge about this patient at all. I didn't know anything about her apart from her name. That was it. That's all I had. So I went into her room and said, "Hello," whatever her name was. Are you all right? How are you getting on? And realized straight away, oh, she's completely non-responsive. Um, she, I think she might be aware that I'm here in the room, but I'm not going to get any kind of response from her. I'm not going to get any kind of, you know, even a nod or of the head or anything like that, because essentially because she's so close to death, she doesn't have the energy to do any of that stuff. And I really floundered. I really because I was not prepared for it at all. So I kind of my mouth kept on asking questions and my brain kept saying, stop asking questions, she can't answer. So I kept on going like, are you all right, you being well looked after? And my brain was going, why are you asking that? It must be really frustrating for her. So eventually, I didn't stay for very long, and then eventually left, and thought as I left, okay, I clearly need to be prepared for this, because this is going to be a thing that I'm going to have to face a lot.
Mm.
So it's a good lesson learned, because now I have a collection of things to read to people, for example. So I have some religious stuff if they're notes say that they're religious, but if they're not religious, then I have poems and that kind of thing, uh, whatever, I wandered lowly as a cloud,
Yeah.
nice kind of peaceful poems, which I think I'd find comforting in that position. And indeed, over the past couple of weeks, I've been in that situation quite a lot now, but I feel slightly more prepared, and I'll talk to them a little bit and say it's a lovely day outside, and here's what's happening at the moment in the news and that kind of stuff. And anyway, I've just got a couple of little things to read to you. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but if you can, I hope that you find them peaceful, and I'll read them a poem or whatever it is. But how much easier would my job be if we had all of that information that you've just asked?
Mhm.
If somebody had thought before, not even that, I don't want to put it on the patient, but if we had a system which thought about this stuff before, so that when I come in as a chaplain, or when visitors come in, or even when doctors and nurses come in, we have, at the moment it tells us they're Church of England or whatever sometimes, but to have a thing that actually tells us this is what they've said they'd like to listen to, this is the kind of materials they've said that they found soothing, in terms of bed sheets and that kind of stuff. This is the kind of belief system that they have. And, if you're going to read to them, maybe they'd appreciate these verses from the Quran or
Yeah.
whatever it is, that kind of stuff. Just like haven't had that thought process, that dialogue before you're actually there in bed and don't have the power to have that dialogue anymore. Yeah, if we could get that system in place, that would make dying so much better for everybody, wouldn't it? So I think it's awesome.
About it and comparing it to the birth space, pregnant women, they make a birth plan.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it's kind of similar. Look who's
We
here.
have a dog in shot. Hello.
Ah,
He's really he or she?
it's a he.
He seems really nonplussed
Yeah.
about being on YouTube. What's his
Oh,
name?
he's so casual. He's so casual about it. His name is Cliff.
Cliff. Oh, Cliff's a good boy.
Yeah.
Is Cliff coming with you
Oh,
to
he's such a
Portugal?
good boy. No, he's not. I'm gonna
Oh
miss him so
no, that's so
much.
sad. Oh,
I
Cliff.
know. So I'm really soaking up every moment I
Yeah.
have with him.
How old is Cliff?
He's 15 months.
Oh wow, so he's really
So
young.
he's, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that because he's not small, is he? He's a big boy.
He comes to about knee height.
Oh, okay. Oh, maybe it must have just
Yeah.
been the angle then. He's actually
He's a
taller than.
medium size. Well, is he medium size? He's probably a little bit bigger than medium size.
Okay.
But he's not gonna grow that much more.
Oh. Well, if you are
Yeah, but
listening to this
he's a good
podcast
boy.
on one of the podcasting platforms rather than watching it on YouTube, you've just missed a lovely interaction with a dog. So check out the YouTube page if you want to see Cliff.
Yeah. So actually, this is interesting because this has been on my mind a lot. I was never a dog person, right? I was never really an animal person.
Mhm.
And then suddenly I had a pup,
Okay.
and it completely changed how I view the world
Right.
because they have such a calming presence.
Yes.
And not only their presence, but they have that effect. Like Cliff has that effect on me as well. And
Yeah.
I am just thinking what it would be like to have, this is maybe going to sound so odd, but what would it be like if there is specially trained dogs to be around people who are dying? Because like they are the best space holders. They can
Ah,
hold space like no one else.
that's amazing. I would love that. That would be so cool. In fact, when you said just now, one of your questions is what material would you like to have on you? You know, what material do you find soothing? A dog lying on the bed. I can't think of anything better. You
Yeah.
know, like that would be well. You know, let's say a well-behaved dog, not a dog that's gonna
Yes, of course, of
piss on the
course.
bad or whatever. But
I
like
like nudge with the toys all the time.
yeah,
It's like,
that's
come
right.
on,
That's
play
right.
with
Have like
me.
squeaky toys while you're trying to rest. But a good boy like Cliff, that would be amazing. Yeah, definitely. There is definitely something about animals, I think, that like
Yeah.
I've got a couple of cats who one of them is just about in shot. If I angle it down, you might just be able to see a little lump there sleeping in the
Oh, yep.
corridor.
Yep.
Who certainly at times can drive me nuts because they're, you know, pets are quite demanding, but
Hmm.
they're also, I mean, like say this past year, which actually you know, you talk about death being around all the time. This past year with COVID and stuff has represented a kind of death, I think, for a lot of people, even people
Hmm.
who haven't lost loved ones to COVID, but have lost a lifestyle, have lost their comfort, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, have faced kind of little deaths in their own lives in different ways. And that's certainly true for me as well. I found the past year really, really hard. But having the cats around, having a little bit of kind of company, even if it's not human
Company.
company, um, has just made it all a little bit more bearable, you know, and they're cute and they make
Mhm.
me laugh. And when they sit on your lap and purr, that really, I mean, I think it's proven, isn't it? I think there's research that shows that it lowers your blood rate and that your blood
Yeah.
pressure, sorry, and that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, I'm with you. I think dogs for the dying. Let's make it happen.
Dogs for the dying. I like that.
Yeah,
That sounds
yeah,
good.
yeah. You should move to the UK rather than Portugal, and we could set that up. I've got
Well,
an
maybe
in
I'll
at the
consider
hospital.
it.
Okay, cool. But genuinely, I think that's
Yeah.
so cool. That'd be such a great idea
Yeah.
because everyone loves dogs,
Yeah.
don't they?
Well, most people do indeed.
And people who
And
don't
even if
love
there's like the
dogs,
odd one out, like me, like they'll
yeah,
be a convert within no time because if I can change my mind, anyone
that's
can.
right. That's right. And if people who really, really, absolutely don't love dogs, they don't deserve to have a peaceful death. That's I didn't mean that. I'd like to retract that
Is that
statement.
is that
If any
is
of
that
my
karma?
colleagues at the hospital are listening, can I be clear that I did not mean that? Any potential
Oh, you,
patients?
oh, you just gave a whole new meaning to the karma concept.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Um, Myrthe, this has been a really great conversation. I'm really aware. I said I'd keep you for an hour, and obviously you're getting into your evening. I don't want to take your whole evening, but I just wondered, like, just as we're kind of drawing the conversation to a close, you've obviously been studying and you've learned a lot, and you've learned a lot about the process of death and dying and that kind of thing. And lots of people who are listening to this, maybe most people who are listening to this, will feel scared of that stuff. And I just wonder, like, are there what have you learned in the past couple of years to help you feel more peaceful and less scared about the end of life? Is there anything that you can say to people who are listening that has helped you with your own kind of, yeah, your own kind of dealing with mortality?
Hmm.
Sorry, that's a huge
Um,
question that I've just dropped
that
on
is
you
a
without any
really big
preparation.
question, and we could fill a full podcast with that. I think. Um, but I think the main elements for me are to be really curious about it. Like it
Mm,
is gonna happen.
yeah.
It is gonna happen no matter what. So I know that. And how can I then make the experience, plan for the experience to be my own?
Mm,
Obviously, it's a plan. Things can change,
of
things might
course.
not work out in the moment, but familiarizing yourself with options, talking about it, like letting people know how you feel about things, and even just having like basic conversations about death and dying. um, I think you'll find that there is a lot of um, a lot of connection will come from those conversations because so many people feel the same way,
Mm,
right? And when we see something, experience something that resonates, that means that we connect with one another.
yeah.
And when we connect with one another, we take away a little bit of fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because fear is such a big thing, but we mustn't forget that, excitement is the exact same feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Fear and excitement are the same feeling. I'm not saying get super excited about death, because death is hard, and it
Yeah.
can also be really hard work, and afterwards it's hard, when
Yeah.
you're grieving someone's death. So I'm not saying get excited, but I'm saying explore it with a sense of curiosity, and maybe you do get a little bit excited about knowing what type of music you want to hear, or
Mm-hmm.
knowing what smells make you feel good. Like, how cool
Yeah.
is it that you can plan that? How cool is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. 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 That's awesome. That's cool. But I
Yeah,
think the advice should be get yourself a death doula so you can start having someone to talk about with this
I
kind of
didn't want
thing.
to
Because
say it like that, but I'm glad you did.
well, I'm saying it for you. Because like honestly, genuinely, this
Mm.
like talking to you in this conversation, generally my experience over the past couple of weeks working in the hospital and stuff, has made me think, uh, about my own mortality, and that I'd like to be prepared for it when it
Yeah,
comes. And like you say, potentially there are some people die in ways that you can't be prepared for, but actually for the most part you can. um, and yeah, I'd love to kind of talk to a death doula and to begin to work through those kinds of questions and that kind of thing. So I think it would
that's
be
awesome. Like, you're
sort of,
never too young to begin that process, because
yeah,
we don't know when
yeah,
it's going to happen in many cases, right? And
yeah,
even if we get
absolutely, yeah,
a period, if the doctor tells us, okay, you have 6 to 12 months left, which they don't often do anymore, I believe.
hmm,
They're a little bit hesitant with giving specific time frames,
right,
because so often they're wrong,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then people get left with extra time, and they don't know what to do with the extra time because they were prepared to already be dead.
yeah, yeah,
Also, that's a whole
yeah,
other conversation. I'm probably
yeah.
not the nicest wrap up, but
Yeah.
but definitely, yeah, be curious, and start to think about rituals that you want to bring into that period of into that experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I would
Yeah.
also just chuck in my own little personal recommendation, which is I was given a book which I found, you might have read it. It's called With the End in Mind. And it's written by a palliative
Mhm.
care nurse. I think her name is Catherine Mannix or Maddox or something. I'll find out and put a link in the show notes. Um, but she talks about actually what happens when people die, like what you can
Yeah.
expect to
Yeah.
experience and that kind of stuff, which sounds scary, but actually it's the opposite. I found it really soothing, really reassuring that actually it's not as scary a process as you might think that it is. And I would really recommend that for anybody who's kind of
Yeah,
scared
that's a
about
good
this kind of
one.
stuff. It's a great
It's a
book.
good one because once we know what is to come in terms of physical symptoms, right?
Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
better prepared.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Oh, well,
Yeah.
brilliant. Myrthe, thank you so much. We've hit just the 1 hour mark. So that's perfect and really interesting and meaningful conversation. So thank you for making the time for me all the way over on the other side of the world. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you too. This was awesome. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope the listeners got something from it as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure they will. And I'll put a link to your website in the show notes as well, so people
Fabulous.
can look at that for themselves.
Cool.
Um, and presumably your contact details are there. So if somebody wanted to reach out and talk to you about
Yeah.
this kind of stuff, they could do that.
Yeah. 100%.
Brilliant.
And there are not specific details on the services because, as I mentioned, everything is so unique. So
Mhm.
I would always have an initial conversation with you first before we move into any kind of direction, so it's all
Yeah,
really easygoing, and we'll see what is needed.
great.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you too.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your Australian evening while I just start my English day.
Yeah, beautiful.
Was that okay? I don't know, because as I'm recording this, that conversation you just listened to hasn't happened yet. So I hope it was good. I hope you liked it. I hope I liked it. I hope Myrthe liked it. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you did like it, I'd be really grateful if you could take 30 seconds on whatever platform you're using, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, whatever, and let me know that you liked it by giving it a thumbs up, a like, a subscribe, a review, whatever it is that you're able to do on your platform. It's not just for my ego. It is partly for my ego, but not just for my ego. It really helps the podcast because it helps to feed the internet algorithms that we are slaves to in the 21st century. And it just means that those algorithms will kind of push my podcast under more people's noses and bring it to a larger audience. So I would genuinely be really grateful if you could take a minute to like, review, subscribe, thumbs up, stars, whatever it is, however it works on your platform. That would really help me out. If you would like to find out a little bit more about Myrthe and her work, then check out her website, fullcircledoula.org. That's fullcircledoula.org, which has some more information about the kind of stuff that she does, as well as all the usual stuff that you would find on a website about how to get in touch and use her services and that kind of thing. Do check it out. Myrthe sent me the link earlier today as I'm recording this, and I was impressed by how good looking and professional the website is. So do check it out. I think that's all from me for this month. I haven't got a guest lined up yet for the 1st of November episode, but hopefully I will between now and then. I will do my best to. I'll also try to put out a mini halfway through the month. And don't forget, there's also Joy Story, the podcast that I do with Dan Mills de Bell, which isn't on YouTube, but is on all of the classic podcasting platforms. If you just search for Joy Story, you'll find us there. That usually comes out usually comes out. We've only done 2 episodes. The plan is for that to come out on the first Monday of every month, so not too long after this comes out. Good. Yeah, that's all from me. I am going to go home, have a cup of tea, have a biscuit, enjoy the rest of my Saturday, and we'll look forward to recording the conversation you've just listened to tomorrow. Time is weird. Okay, I love you guys. Have a good October. Happy birthday to my mum, which happens in October. Happy Halloween to all of you guys who like spooks and ghouls. And happy All Hallows to all of you guys who like traditional religious feasts. I'll see you in November. Bye.